Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Father Ted Talks Faith in Action series. Today is a beautiful but crisp November morning, and I'm out here just having a little bit of a walk in the woods and just kind of taking in the beautiful environment. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about a question that's been coming up recently with a lot of people, and especially with some of my closer friend circles. And that question is about the problem of death. And now, what do I mean by the problem of death? Well, it's kind of a little bit of a misnomer because for Orthodox Christians, we don't have a problem with death. As Orthodox Christians, we are people of the resurrection. And yet, for some reason, more and more people these days, and even Orthodox Christians within the church, especially sometimes younger people, have a difficulty with understanding our approach to death. How do we view it? Why does it happen? Why does it happen to sometimes, younger people or people who seem to have their whole life ahead of them? And, how should we see death? How should we approach it? What should we feel? What should we think when these things happen? And, how can we kind of, avoid falling into the depression and the sadness and the hopelessness that a lot of people fall into when they actually, face death. So I guess like the first thing that I wanted to say is that I always like when I hear the epistle in the funeral service of the Orthodox Church. I like the first lines of St. Paul's epistle. The very first line that he says to his brother Christians is, he says, "My brethren, I don't want you to be ignorant about those who have fallen asleep, so that you do not grieve like those who have no hope." And that is a very, very powerful statement, right? Don't grieve like those who have no hope. Um, you know, the Apostle Paul knew, and of course Christ knows, and the church knows that all of us are going to grieve, and it's normal for us to grieve, especially when we lose people that we love. It's normal. It's not a sin to be in mourning, I guess you could say, and to have what we say in Greek, benthos. Um, but we grieve with hope, not without hope. And this is the big difference between Orthodox Christians and historically, ancient Christians and everybody else. That this idea of hope, right? That we grieve with hope, and of course, what is that hope? The hope is in the resurrection, right? So the resurrection for us is key. It is the overcoming of death, right? And a lot of times, people don't kind of associate the two. When something bad happens, when somebody loses somebody, whatever age they may be, but especially when it's somebody young, people's mind does not go to the resurrection, to the future. They always go to the immediate problem, the immediate loss. And in their mind, the first thing that they usually think of is, I'm never going to see this person again. Of course, this is contrary to what we believe as Orthodox Christians, which of course is that we will see each other again. So when I tell people and I mention the resurrection, the first thing that they think of is Pascha, Easter, which is what we celebrate every year. And they think of that, but they don't associate it with their own personal resurrection, right? So I always say in funeral services that, the hope that we have is basically from the fact that we don't only celebrate Pascha as an event that happened 2,000 years ago to Christ being, crucified and then resurrecting himself, but also it is more so our own personal resurrection that we look forward to in the future. And so, this kind of hope looking forward towards the future, this is really important. Now, a lot of Orthodox Christians don't know the basic teachings of the faith when it comes to this. What do we believe about the resurrection in the future? Well, it's very, very clear in Scripture that Christ speaks about at the end times when Christ will return again, where the second coming will happen, as it's called, and at the end of days, at the end of all time. And what happens then? Well, actually, we will all be resurrected again, our physical bodies, not our souls only. We're not some ghost floating around. The kingdom of heaven is not some spiritual reality that has nothing to do with physical reality. There will be an actual physical resurrection. And a lot of people skip over this. They seem not to know it, even Orthodox Christians. If we look at the resurrection of Christ, it's not just Christ resurrecting or keeping his soul alive. He actually resurrects his own physical body, right? And when he appears to the apostles 40 days after the resurrection, he is actually himself. He has the holes in his hands and in his side from the nails and from the spear. He retains his physical, aspects and attributes. And so we look forward to the future where there will also be a full resurrection. What does this mean? It means that from the time we die until the time of the second coming, our soul is temporarily separated from our bodies. Of course, our bodies will decompose, they will go into the ground, and they will disintegrate as nature, has dictated. But at the end, all our bodies will be, kind of reformed again and resurrected, and our soul will be reconnected with the body again. And so we will have a full resurrection, and only then will we be full human beings. So a lot of people ask me, well, Father, why does this have to happen? Why isn't our soul just, why is our soul, fine on its own? Why isn't that the only important part? Because today we tend to have this kind of idea that the soul is more important than the body. But for us Orthodox Christians, we believe that the body and the soul are equally important. One is not more important than the other, right? This is why we insist on full burial. We don't insist on destroying the body through cremation or discarding the body. That the body is so important to us that we incense it during services, during the funeral services. We honor it. We have relics of saints where God works miracles through their bodies to show the sanctity of their lives. So the body is very, very important. So we're made as psychosomatic beings in Genesis, right? God makes man out of the earth, out of the clay, out of the natural elements, and he imbues him with a soul, a living soul, the breath of God, and we become a living human being. So the real living human being is both body and soul together. And this separation that happens because of death, because of our disobedience, because of the fall, it is temporary and it is unnatural for us. Our soul is not meant to leave our body. It wasn't supposed to be like that from the beginning. And so, the only time we're a full human being, we're our full selves, is when we are in the body. And this is why the resurrection has to happen. Our souls need to be reunited with our bodies before the final judgment happens, so that we can stand before God as full human beings, the way we were meant to be made, the way we were meant to be as full human beings, right? So our soul and our bodies are equally important and are really just one thing. And, it is us who separate these things in our modern day and age. So we have to remember that our resurrection is extremely important. And so when we think about death, we think about the future where we have hope in the resurrection, where, we are going to come back. So that's one important thing. The resurrection is our ultimate hope. And some of the symbolism that we see within services always points towards that. If you notice at Orthodox funeral services, there's always kind of like the symbolism of coming back again. You see this with the resurrection icon that is always placed next to our loved ones on the casket during the funeral service. We see it in the white burial shroud, which is called the savano, which we cover our loved ones, and how it usually has the icon of the resurrection on it. And we always cover our loved ones at the end of the service with that, showing that they are entering into the joy of the resurrection, right? This kind of precursor to the second coming and to the final times. And one of the most important things is the use of the wheat, the koliva, right? As Orthodox Christians, we boil wheat, and a lot of times we don't know why we do it, but we boil wheat not as a symbol of death, but hearkening back to the words of Christ in the Gospel of John, where he speaks about himself. He speaks about, about his own, betrayal and death on the cross and resurrection. And he uses the example of the grain of wheat, where he says, unless the seed first falls into the ground and dies, right, it cannot produce new life, right? So this is, of course, how Christians see themselves. We see ourselves as the wheat, as the seed. And, through our lives, we try to be good people. We try to, emulate Christ, so that when we pass away, when we leave this life temporarily, we are the good seed that goes into the ground, right? And the church takes us and brings us into the temple, into the building of the church, and gives us honor and praise for us. And then essentially the church plants us for the resurrection, and we wait until the second coming. This is why, if you notice, during the Orthodox service, we don't refer to the person who has died as someone who is dead, but we refer to them as somebody who is sleeping, who has fallen asleep, because of course the person who is sleeping will resurrect again, will wake up again. And so we have this kind of symbolism of being put to sleep and temporarily waiting until we will resurrect again. And so again, resurrection, number one, for hope, and number two, these beautiful symbols of sleep. You'll see here that we are out here in nature in the fall, approaching winter. We are in November now, and you see all the leaves are falling and the trees are almost barren. And again, this is a beautiful analogy. I like to use this a lot in funeral services, where we see nature, right? Like nature, the cycle of nature, teaches us about ourselves, because God creates the whole universe, and of course he's created nature, and of course he creates us. And there is this beautiful divine providence where God is teaching us and preparing us for our own life cycle by the way that the nature works around us, right? So if you pay attention, in nature, what happens in the spring? Things wake up, right? The trees bud, plants bloom, and everything kind of starts to grow just like a human being. You know, when we're babies, when we're born into the world, it's like the spring of our lives. You know, we're new plants, we're neophytes, we're growing. And then we have the summer, and the summer is everything is in full bloom. It's beautiful, it's warm, there's energy. Nature is very, very active in the summer. Just like when we come into our adulthood, we are very, very, very active. You know, we create families, we create businesses, we finish our studies, we go into like the prime of our lives, I guess you could say. And then what happens is that the fall comes. In the fall, things turn, things slow down, the weather changes, things get colder, and you see that the trees start to lose their leaves, as we see here, and they begin to go dormant. They don't die. People think that things die in the winter. They don't die. They basically go to sleep, and they wait out the winter in a dormant state. Animals hibernate, all these kind of things we know. And so the same thing with us as human beings. We get older, right? And we start to slow down, and we kind of begin to enjoy our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, things like that, and we begin to prepare for our sleep, our dormition. As you know, we refer to the Virgin Mary when she falls asleep. We call it dormition. And so then the winter comes, and the winter is the time where we have passed away, but we are sleeping and we wait. But what happens is that there is this cycle, and the cycle continues. So we always emphasize that even though we have passed away temporarily, we are simply in the winter of our lives, and the spring will come again. Of course, that spring will be the resurrection, will be the second coming of all things. And so nature shows us this kind of constant loop. We do it every year, over and over again. And if you notice, the church calendar follows the same thing, right? The church calendar follows the same cycles. It's not by chance that we celebrate Pascha, Easter, in the spring, the coming of the vernal equinox, the coming of the spring. This is when we celebrate the resurrection of Christ, when nature is renewing itself, is rejuvenating, is coming back alive again. This is when we are also celebrating Pascha. And so, these things, they teach us and they prepare us for the ultimate reality of our lives, so that we're not surprised when these things happen. We're not surprised when these things happen, that we know what to anticipate, we know what to expect, but we also have hope in the future. So these are the kind of things that we need to think about, and the kind of things that we should be discussing, not only with our friends who perhaps are going through difficulties, going through loss, dealing with a death of a loved one, or even illness, or an impending death, but these are also the types of things that we should teach our children. I like to use the analogy of the seasons, and especially the idea of planting and growing again in the spring. This is something very useful for children. They will understand it. They will understand, that their grandparents or their parents or anybody around them who have passed away, that it is not the end, and there's constant hope, that we live in hope as Orthodox Christians. And then they will understand why we do memorial services and why we pray for the dead, because we are waiting for them to come back again. And so we have this ultimate hope. And children can understand this, and there's nothing for them to be afraid of. And so when they visit cemeteries, or when they go to funeral services, which of course children should go to, or when they attend memorial services, and they see all these symbols, especially the wheat, the koliva that we pass out to people, or when they see in the funeral service the resurrection icon or the savanol, all these kind of symbols, it all comes together, and they understand, this idea of this beautiful cycle of life. And it doesn't scare them anymore, but rather it helps them prepare for that ultimate reality. And so these are just some of the thoughts that I had, especially on this beautiful autumn morning, as we see kind of nature going to sleep, going into hibernation, going into dormancy for the winter. This is the way that we see our loved ones, and we wait for the spring, we wait for the second coming, we wait for the resurrection, where we will see each other all again. And so I hope that these kind of images are useful for all of you when contemplating death, when contemplating the loss of loved ones. That is a temporary loss. It is we have a respect for the person who has passed away. We have a reverence for them. We chant, "May their memory be eternal," constantly to remember them, because they're not gone. Their soul still exists, and that we will see them again. So we don't say goodbye to them forever and forget about them, but we keep doing memorials. We keep doing prayers for them, because we know that we will see them again, and we have this ultimate hope. So I hope this is helpful. God bless all of you. If you have any other questions, feel free to email us at Fr.TEDTalks@gmail.com. But until next time, please take care. God bless all of you, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.